Howdy, howdy. Dr. Sean Tassone, America's Holistic Gynecologist. It's starting to get into the winter months, which is a wonderful blessing, especially for all you women out there having hot flashes because it's getting colder now. My listeners in Australia, obviously, for y'all, it's summer. But for those of us here in the United States, we are finally getting into, I think, probably my favorite season of all, and that is autumn. I grew up in a little part of Massachusetts called the Berkshires, in a little town called Adams, Massachusetts, which is right outside of North Adams and Williamstown. Williamstown, a lot of people may know because of Williams College, which is one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And as we learned a few days ago about the passing of Matthew Perry from Friends, he was born in Williamstown, which I did not know, which is only 9 miles from where I grew up. And on that note, I really don't, think too much when celebrities pass away. But for some reason, with Matthew Perry, I just really feel like a part of my life was in that show, Friends. I mean, the characters, the comedy, the people that were in it. I mean, you really felt like this was a part of your life. And for 9 years, or I think that's how long it was on TV, I really feel like I connected with those characters, especially Chandler and Matthew Perry. So my heart goes out to him and his family. And I know he was struggling with demons and he had beat those, but you never really know about somebody's life or where they're at. And so it really just makes me appreciate the things I have, my children, my family. And a little teaser, the month of December, 4 weeks in a row leading up to Christmas, I am going to be having each one of my children as an episode, how they grew up. They're all in different age groups, 30, 27, 22, and 19. Just their struggles going through divorce, having me as a father, God forbid. But it's going to be really fun in December. So today, I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a review episode and really kind of shamelessly talk about my book, The Hormone Balance Bible, because I think there's a lot of hormone misinformation out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding the Women's Health Initiative, the damage that it did to women's health, and how it basically ruined an entire generation of not only women and their understanding of hormones and the safety of hormones, but it really damaged an entire generation of physicians, in my opinion, because so much of the misinformation about hormones is being spread by my colleagues, let alone family practice docs and internal medicine docs. Freaking GYNs are spreading misinformation about hormone replacement therapy. So I want to talk about the Hormone Balance Bible because if you don't have the book, obviously I'm going to recommend you get it. It is one of the only books you would need on hormones. It's 512 pages of information about hormones. And I want to describe the book and kind of what's in it. So for those of you that don't have it, you have an idea of what's in it. And for those of you that have it, you might have noticed you could read it cover to cover, but that's not why I wrote it the way that I did. It is more of a sectional thing that you can look at as you go through certain stages of your life, especially in perimenopause and younger women, because the way that the book is laid out, you're going to have hormonal changes and more fluctuations than someone that is in menopause. And for those of you that don't know, the beginning of the book, there is a quiz, and the quiz is free and it's online. www.tassonemd.com/quiz, where you can answer about 35 questions that I purposely on the back end mathematically weighted the formulas, and it's pretty accurate. And it will give you an answer as to which of my 12 hormonal archetypes you fit into, just to give you kind of a start. It's not like testing. It's a quiz. Everybody's got a quiz. My quiz is the best, naturally. But it is good because it's 35 questions. It's not like 5 questions. And then on the back end, the quiz is weighted appropriately. And I've had so many women email me about it. I've probably had 25,000 women take the quiz, and they are fascinated at how accurate it is. So, that being said, why did I write the book? Well, I had written books in the past, a couple on pregnancy, one on contraception, Hands Off My Belly, and Spiritual Pregnancy were two books I wrote in 2009 and 2014. And then Contraception Deception with Nat Kringoudis was somewhere around 2018 or 19. And I really just always had this bigger kind of concept about hormones. I'd been doing hormones for a long time. I think I shared the story on Instagram where back in the mid 2000s when Suzanne Summers, rest in peace, wrote her book Sexy Years. At the back of the book, she had a section state by state where she named physicians who were into hormone replacement and knew kind of stuff outside the box. And she was kind enough to list me as a reference for the state of Arizona, as where I was living at the time. And I think I was the only person in the state. And she was on Oprah. And the day she went on Oprah, the next day or two, my phones were just ringing off the hook. And so indirectly, she propelled me even deeper into hormone replacement because of the volume of patients that I got. And the rest is sort of history. But the other reason I wrote the book was for my mother, because when she went through her ovarian cancer 5-year journey before she passed from the disease, what I noticed was I knew a lot about ovarian cancer. I knew a lot about the surgery and the struggles. What I didn't know was that they weren't going to give her hormone replacement and the suffering that she would go through for basically 5 years. My mom suffered because they wouldn't give her any hormones, insomnia, irritability, hot flashes, low energy, just mood was down. She just felt miserable. And so what I noticed was I couldn't even help my mom have a good quality of life. And so I went on this journey of my own after she died. And in so doing, I think propelled me into this PhD that I did in philosophy, looking at different ways of healing and more outside the box ventures. And I had all this training and I had all this information in my head, but I wasn't really sharing it. And so the book came out of that. The book in and of itself is basically the big hormones: thyroid, cortisol, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, broken down into the 12 most common hormonal imbalances that I see in the office. But I also wanted to talk to them about them in a way that wasn't just, oh, here's low testosterone here. I mean, there's books out there like that. What I wanted to do was I wanted to share stories, because as a male gynecologist, what I've had the privilege and the honor to do over my 20 plus year career is sit with about 50,000 women and really just listen. I mean, listen to what they're telling me, listen to their trials, tribulations, the changes in their lives. When you have been practicing as long as I have, you now have some of the babies that you delivered having babies. And the women that you delivered 20 years ago are now perimenopausal or menopausal. And so you age with your population. And I really wanted to give back to the hormone community that I had found a niche with, and for the women that had trusted me. And what I noticed was over the years, I started just noticing trends. And some of these women were telling the same stories, but with different verbiage. And what I did was I was reading at the time, I was reading all these books on archetypes, Carl Jung and Caroline Myss and things like that. And so I started thinking, well, gosh, we have these storylines and everybody loves stories. Stories are how we used to transfer knowledge throughout the generations before we had computers and libraries. It was all done verbally. And so And sometimes the stories can change, but I had the luxury of having tens of thousands of women tell me their stories. And I noticed certain trends. So I started putting these stories into these archetypal boxes. So then I had these 12 hormonal archetypes with stories. And when I talked to patients, I would say, "Oh, you sound like the saboteur." And I would tell them the story of the saboteur. And I noticed that women were crying, they were laughing. Actually, just had a lady today in the office that was crying. And I hope it's not because I'm mean. I think it's because I listened and I connected. And for the first time, she felt validated. And that really brought me a lot of fulfillment in what I do. And when I make that connection, I was like, darn it, I can go over labs with people and it's fine, but I don't have that same connection. And so I had these 12 archetypes. But when you write a book, you want to point out the issue, but then you want to have a solution, right? It doesn't do anybody any good to say, "Yep, you're gaining weight," and that's the end of the book. I mean, that's horrible. So I also had a lot of training in different things, spiritual practices, energetic medicine, or what I call woo-woo medicine, nutrition, exercise, supplements. And while I wasn't necessarily an expert in each of those categories, I had a pretty good depth of knowledge in many of them. And so what I did was I decided to put these 12 archetypes into the book and then have a 6-step process by which women could heal themselves on their own. One of those steps needed a physician because it deals with hormones. And I called that the Shines Protocol. And I'm going to be teasing this Shines Protocol in an upcoming episode because for those of you that are interested in just getting your toe in the water of what you can do to help yourself with hormone imbalances without even necessarily knowing which imbalance you have, but you're sitting there at midnight and you're miserable, you're not sleeping, your energy's down, your sex drive is down, you gain on weight. Where can you even start? And I'm going to have a 6-module Shines Protocol course that's going to be online, that's going to be easy to access, and it's going to talk about the 6 steps and then ways to access those. And the 6 steps for Shines is a spiritual practice, hormonal modulation. The I is infoceuticals, and infoceuticals is kind of a fancy way of saying energetic transfer. So things like, essential oils, the actual infoceuticals that are out there made by NES Health that are basically energetically imbued water, acupuncture, massage, things like that. The N is nutrition, E is exercise, and the last S is supplementation. So the only step in that process where you need me or an MD is the hormonal part. So I have these 12 archetypes. Each of the archetypes has a 6-step Shines protocol. So you can take the test, you can look at your archetype and you can try out the supplements, you could try out the exercise routine, or you can get your blood test or your urine tested for hormones. And I would obviously say test, don't guess, but for some people that don't want to do the testing, I totally get that. So you could then look at the book and see which of the archetypes you are. Now, if you want to do the test and you have the book, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you buy books. On page 14, there is a QR code that you can scan that will take you to the quiz online, or you can go to tassonemd.com/quiz. And yes, it's on page 14. It will take you directly to the quiz. So what I wanted to do in this episode is just go through each of the archetypes so you get familiar with the names. And then probably starting in January, I will go through each of the archetypes in an episode. December will be dedicated towards my children, as I said, a little more personal, a little more growth, just kind of getting to know me and my family a little bit better because why not? I love you guys and I don't mind sharing of myself. I think it helps me be more human and I think it helps you know what kind of a man and a human that I am, and a doctor. I might have a lot of great reviews online, but I think, part of the connection, part of what makes me who I am is that I don't mind sharing about myself, my struggles, my own issues. You all watched me over the last year lose about 40 pounds, and I'm sharing that. And so, yeah, it was just part of the evolution. So I wanted to talk about that. And then probably later in November, I'll be bringing up the Shines protocol where you can look at that. So let's talk about hormones and hormone imbalances. The first archetype is called the queen. The queen is basically an estrogen dominant state. Now, there are doctors out there like my arch nemesis, who will go unnamed, Voldemort, and she will tell you that hormone imbalances don't exist. They do. I wrote a 500-page book on it. If hormone imbalances didn't exist, then why do we treat hormone issues like PCOS, acne, and other things with birth control pills, which are hormones? It's totally contradictory. They totally exist. So any doctor that tells you that, run away, flip them off, do whatever you got to do, but don't let them treat you because they obviously don't care. The queen is estrogen dominance. Estrogen dominance technically is not a medical diagnosis. Similar to adrenal fatigue, not a medical diagnosis. So a lot of the medical community will give you kickback. What I mean by estrogen dominance is a woman that has estrogen levels so high that they are causing her issues. You could also have low progesterone on top of that, which is a different archetype. There are a few that are combined. But I'll get to that in a minute. But let's just say estrogen to progesterone as a ratio is off. In the follicular phase, it usually is off, and that can be normal. But if it's dominant, if it's all the time, if you're not having a period and you have constant estrogen without progesterone, that is called the queen. Now, why did I name it the queen? Well, think about it. The most kind of associated hormone with females is estrogen. It isn't necessarily the most proliferative hormone in women. That's actually testosterone. Women have more testosterone than estrogen. However, we associate estrogen with women. The most consummately female powerful woman is the queen. At least it was when I was writing the book. That being said, estrogen dominance I called the queen. Now, the thing about the queen is you can be a good queen and benevolent and people love you, and you can be a crazy queen, kind of like the queen from Alice in Wonderland, off with their heads. That's the imbalance. The benevolent queen is fine. Everybody loves her. She rules well. She's nice to people. The one that's off with her head, that's estrogen dominance. So the queen is estrogen dominance. And the Shines protocol in the book has a 6-step process to help with estrogen dominance. And usually I'll focus on helping the body detoxify through the liver and through the colon to help estrogen levels detoxify more naturally that way. And sometimes we have to look for other reasons for the estrogen dominance. The second one, and these are not in any particular order, the second one is progesterone deficiency. Progesterone deficiency, I have aptly named the unbalanced heroine. Now, why did I call it that? Well, progesterone is the most influential hormone at what point in a woman's life? Pregnancy. Progesterone is a dominant force in pregnancy. And I felt at the time, because I wrote a book called Spiritual Pregnancy, which is where I superimposed pregnancy over Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Some of you may not know Joseph Campbell, but he came up with this concept called the hero's journey that we see in a lot of cultures, a lot of storylines where you have a call to action you go on this amazing journey, you come back and you share that knowledge. And I thought there was no other journey more prevalent than pregnancy for a woman. And so that's why I call it the unbalanced heroine, because in that archetype, your progesterone is off. And the crazy thing about the unbalanced heroine is that progesterone is a horribly underutilized hormone, especially in women that have had hysterectomies. Because how many times have you heard, oh, you don't need progesterone, you had a hysterectomy? Like all the time. Women write that all the time to me on Instagram. And it's true. You don't need the progesterone to protect you against uterine cancer because you don't have a uterus. However, if you want to sleep, if you don't want to rip people's faces off, you might want progesterone in your life. It helps calm you down, helps you sleep at night, can help with anxiety. It upregulates GABA receptors in your brain. So women who have low progesterone in my book are called the unbalanced heroines, and it's a very common archetype. Not as common as the queen, but fairly common. If you combine, and I talked about this a second ago, high estrogen or estrogen dominant states with low progesterone, you combine a queen with an unbalanced heroine, a queen with a hero, what do you get? You get the mother. And that is one of my combined archetypes. So women that have super high progesterone or super high estrogen, low progesterone, those are moms, because moms are the queens of their land. They're the queens of the castle. They rule. They can rule with an iron fist. They can be benevolent at times. And yet they're a little bit unbalanced sometimes. They're not always sleeping. They have a lot of anxiety. Sometimes they're biting people's heads off. A great example, a patient a couple days ago. She was, all the kids were at the dinner table, 12, 7, and 5. They were eating. They were crazy, as kids are. And she was putting away the dishes, and somebody spilled a glass of water. And she turned around and she beheaded all of her loyal servants with her voice. And she felt horrible afterwards because she responded the way she did. And when we did her labs, sure enough, estrogen dominance, low progesterone. And I worked with her on getting the estrogen down. We prescribed some bioidentical progesterone. She came back for her follow-up and she said, oh my God, the same thing happened. Dinner, crazy, putting away the dishes. Somebody spilled milk or whatever. I heard the glass break. And she said, I spun around and I literally saw my children flinch, like they were waiting for impact, DEFCON 5, And she said, I just said, oh, don't worry about it, honey, I'll get it. And she said, the 12-year-old looked at her and said, what have you done with my mom? So that's the mother. The mother is a combination of the queen with the unbalanced heroine. The next one, the wise woman. The wise woman is the woman who has basically entered menopause. And she's a wise woman because she now has all that knowledge that she has obtained over the 50 to 55 years of her life. And I really press my wise women, my menopausal women, to share that knowledge with those that are younger, especially the women that are in perimenopause, because once I get them feeling better, once they've helped themselves or they're on hormones, I want them to go out and share the wealth. And so I want them to be the wise women of their tribe and to go out and spread the wealth, that libido, vaginal dryness, hot flashes, mood swings, irritability, night sweats. Those are things that you don't need to have. You can live an amazing, productive life well into your 80s and even 90s nowadays. And you don't need to do it while you're suffering in a menopausal state. Hormones are not to be feared. These women are out there doing it. They're running companies. They're running families. They're in great shape. They're living long lives. They're toned. They're ready to go, and I want them to share this wealth of knowledge. So I have deemed them wise women. We could call them menopausal, but that's such a horrible thing to call them. So let's call them wise women. Now, a funny thing, when I was going through the naming of these archetypes, initially I had called this the crone. I don't know why I did that, but I did. And I was at the, when I was selling my book in New York City, I sat down with the editor, Carrie Thornton, at Day Street, and she's a great lady. And she started laughing, and she's like, "You can't call it the crone." And I said, "You know what? You're right. I that was the only thing I could think of. It just sounded horrible, like you're just super old." And I didn't mean any disrespect, so we changed it to the wise woman. The next one, the workaholic. The workaholic is excess cortisol. And this is one of the ones that's a little harder to diagnose because cortisol is not something that you can check readily through blood. You have to do either urine testing or saliva testing. But workaholics are those women that are on the hamster wheel. It could be work, it could be family, it could be money, it could be lack of sleep, just stress in general. You could just be in a very stressful situation. And that excessive cortisol is driving you to push, 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 or your push, push, push is driving your cortisol. And these women are the type A personalities. They are just the people that are constantly doing no end in sight. Once they scale the mountain, they're going up to the next mountain. There's no stopping them. And it can be helpful. I mean, sometimes you need to be that way to get on in this life, to be the successful person. The problem is you want to be able to turn it off. That excessive cortisol over time can wear you down. It can cause weight gain, sugar levels to go up. It's just not a good way to live your life. Another example of the workaholic is that stress where our ancestors would run away from the tiger, right? They would run away, but once they ran away from the tiger, that flight or fight response, they would calm back down. They would go back to their routine. The problem with our generation, the world that we live in, that tiger is always there mentally, and it never goes away for some people. And so they don't calm down. So the workaholic is that excessive cortisol. Now, keep in mind, doctors in general may not recognize that because cortisol is either to them high or low. And if it's high, that is called Cushing syndrome, which is a horrible disease process to have. So when you talk to physicians or when I talk to my patients, I don't talk about disease. I just say it's in the normal range, but it's like at the high end of normal. And if it's constantly at the high end of normal, that might not be good for you because your normal is different than everybody else's. That leads me to the next archetype called the saboteur. The saboteur is the other end of the spectrum for cortisol, and it's on the low end. Here's the thing. Saboteurs, I call them that because they sabotage their own health. These are the women who take care of everyone and everything else in their lives, except they don't take care of themselves. Sound familiar? I think every woman may go through a saboteur phase. But what happens is, and what I usually see is these women start out as workaholics. They are on the hamster wheel, running, to the point where they eventually burn themselves out and they crash into that saboteur phase. Saboteurs, I just saw a saboteur, a hardworking mom with 3 kids all under the age of 5 and working a full-time job and not getting much help from her spouse, and she's fried. That woman, when I told her the story of the saboteur, literally started crying, and she said, "You know what? You're exactly right. I don't take care of myself, and I'm always doing something. She works all day. She drives a lot, pharmaceutical rep. She gets home. She has to cook dinner. She goes to bed late. She wakes up early. She eats on the road. So she's eating, crappy food, processed foods. And so she's burned out. Now, I find that archetype to actually be one of the toughest to deal with because not only do you have to work on the hormones and the cortisol and things, you have to work on their mind because these people find it hard to stop pushing themselves. And so you really have to help them transition out of that phase. It may mean quitting your job, it may mean slowing down, but the saboteurs tend to have a difficult time. The next one, the nun. Nuns, I jokingly say because you're not getting none and you don't want none, as it's described, is low testosterone. Nobody wants to be a nun. It just sounds, it's kind of like the crone, although I couldn't think of anything better to call it because good nuns don't have sex. But nuns, nonetheless, is the most common archetype far and away. I was shocked by this. I always thought that the queen would be the number one archetype, estrogen dominance, because of the food we eat and the weight that we have in this country and insulin resistance and everything. But no, far and away, the nun is the most prominent archetype. Low testosterone in this country is the plague of the 21st century. Doctors don't talk about it very much. The ones that do are harming women by putting in pellets all the time because it's a moneymaker. So I don't think they have women's best interests at heart. And there's a lot of misunderstood information out there. I think a lot of women are afraid of testosterone initially because they're worried about acne and bulking up, and that's not it. You have more testosterone in your body than any other hormone throughout most of your life. Yet most women, when they come in to see me, are at the bottom of normal. Now, what that means is, and I talk about this on other podcast episodes, especially the one on testosterone and pellets, but the range on a free testosterone is 0.2 to 6.4. That's a 32-fold span mathematically. Massive, massive span. And what that does is, like, let's say a woman comes in and her free testosterone is 0.4. Well, the doctor looks at it and they're like, well, it's normal. Okay. But I could multiply that 15-fold and it would still be normal for a woman. 15-fold. If a man had that low of a testosterone, the world would end. But for women, it's okay. So the nun is my number one archetype. There's a lot of you guys, ladies, out there, and we can fix it. You don't have to suffer with low energy, low libido, decreased mood. I always say if the nun was an archetype, or if the nun was a t-shirt, it would just say, meh, because you just don't care. You just don't have that motivation. On the flip side of that is high testosterone. And I call high testosterone the warrior for obvious reasons. Women with high testosterone are out there destroying things. No, I'm kidding. They're out there, being more archetypally masculine. Women that have the warrior archetype or high testosterone can have polycystic ovarian syndrome that can drive testosterone up. You can be overdosed on testosterone, which I see with pellets and injections daily. Most women on hormone pellets have hormones 8 times the norm for a woman. Sometimes they're in the male range. Some women can have high testosterone from ovarian cysts, adrenal cysts or adrenal tumors. And one of the ones that I saw in the last few months was a lady who her husband was on androgel, and he would rub it on his stomach, and then they would have sex, and they'd obviously sweat, and his testosterone would rub off on her. Now, she loved it because her workouts were amazing, and she was kicking butt and taking names, and she's a realtor, and so she just loved it. However, with your testosterone being 5 to 8 times normal, over time, that can have some negative consequences. And things like cholesterol imbalances, heart disease, clitoromegaly, voice deepening. So it's not something that you want long term. So warriors, while you may feel good, it's not something I want long term. The next one is the underdog. The underdog is low thyroid, or what I might call hypothyroidism or subclinical hypothyroidism. Subclinical hypothyroidism is that process whereby you meet a lot of the criteria symptomatically. Low energy, weight gain, abnormal periods, hair thinning, edema in the legs, cold all the time, and you have all those symptoms, but through labs, you're not technically hypothyroid. So let's look at one of the hormones like free T3. Free T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. Usual labs, the normal range is 2.2 to 4.4, somewhere in there. So many women I see are 2.3, 2.5, somewhere in there, and they have all the symptoms. That could be subclinical hypothyroidism, and they might benefit from using thyroid medication. They might benefit from using supplements. It really varies. But it's a process nonetheless. And I call them underdogs because these women have the potential to do whatever they want, as we all do, but they can't get there because they just don't feel good. They want to go to bed. They feel sluggish. They feel like they're walking in mud. They have brain fog. I've had women describe this state as I'm living my life, but I'm not living my life. Like I'm watching. I'm just watching through a fishbowl. I had one lady say that she was in a fishbowl and she was just watching her life. That is an underdog. And it's an underdog because once we fix that, you come back and you just kick butt and take names. On the flip side of that, you have hyperthyroidism, or the overachiever. And the overachiever is that woman who has maybe too much thyroid. If you've ever met somebody that is a high thyroid person, they are like the Energizer Bunny. A good example is I had a lady years and years ago when I was in the military, and this beautiful woman from London, and her husband who was in the military, and I was in the military, and he was in the British Armed Forces and was over in America for a year or two. And she delivered her baby, and she came in and she was just a wreck. It was probably 6 weeks, 7 weeks later. She'd probably lost 30 pounds. Her hair was falling out. She looked super thin. She looked tired. She looked worn out, and she wasn't sleeping. She was like, I literally don't sleep. I walk around all night. Drew labs, sure enough, her thyroid was through the roof. And she had early stages of Hashimoto's, which is where the antibodies attack the thyroid, so your hormone levels go way up. And we worked with her getting those back down into normal. She felt a lot better. So those women are overachievers. The last two I have are combos. The first one being the chairwoman. The chairwoman is a combination of the queen and the workaholic. So the woman who has estrogen dominance along with cortisol, high cortisol, excess cortisol. So these are women who are queens and they're workaholics. Obviously, chairwomen. They're the ones running the companies. They're the ones running the house. They are constant doers, constant push, entrepreneur types. They may have suffered no periods for a while. They might not be eating good. They're pushing themselves too hard. These women don't sleep. They're constantly up at 2 a.m, checking their phones, doing things. This is a tough one to fix because they're doers and they don't want to slow down. So sometimes dealing with the chairwomen, you know, you have to kind of do it incrementally. Maybe I'll work on one of the hormones at a time. Maybe we'll work on sleep. Maybe we'll work on the spiritual practice or journaling to try and get them to detach from the work piece or the piece that's causing them to push themselves too hard. And then the last archetype is the philosopher. And the philosopher is mostly women that are over the age of 50, that are the women who are wise women, they're menopausal, and they're nuns. So they have estrogen deficiency, they have testosterone deficiency, and you could even throw in they're also unbalanced heroine. So it's a combo of the nun, the unbalanced heroine, and the wise woman, which makes sense because they are low in estrogen, low in progesterone, low in testosterone. They are wise. They are, they have the countenance of the nun. They are also heroes in the journey, but they're a little unbalanced. And philosophers, I call them that because they have the ability to want to think through this, to take the time to take care of themselves. And again, like the wise women, I use this analogy whereby any of you that have ever walked a labyrinth, you start, you do the whole path and you go around and around and around, and then you finally get to the middle. That journey inside the labyrinth, as Hercules did with the Minotaur when he killed the Minotaur in Greek mythology, doesn't do any good to get to the center of the labyrinth. You have to come back out and then share it with other people. And it's the same with menopause. These women, these philosophers, it helps them, yes, to have that healing process. But I want them to come back out of the labyrinth and to share this knowledge with their friends, to spread the word that there is more out there and that you don't have to suffer, that hormones, again, are not to be feared. They are to be cherished. We have ways of helping. Here's the thing. Women didn't live past the age of 50. Even a couple hundred years ago, the average age was probably 48, 49. So menopause wasn't a huge deal because most women didn't live that long. Fast forward, we have aged so well because of society and our advances in health and medicine that we now live into our 80s and 90s pretty productively. The problem is we did it so fast that evolution hasn't really had a chance to catch up yet. So your ovaries poop out at 51. And maybe in a couple hundred years, it'll be 60, maybe longer. Maybe we'll start doing some research into stem cells or something, and the ovaries can be preserved and women can make their own. Who knows what's on the horizon? The point being is, you don't want to live for 30 or 40 years with no hormones. That would be miserable. You don't have to. So, 12 archetypes. My book, The Hormone Balance Bible, has all of those imbalances in there. And each of those imbalances has a 6-step SHINES protocol: spiritual practice, hormones, infoceuticals, nutrition, exercise, and supplementation. All of those you can use to help yourself. And of those 6 steps, you only need the doctor one time for the hormones. The rest of that you can do all on your own. It's a comprehensive plan. I call it my hormone mapping system. I think it's the only one out there, and it's unique. I still see patients one-on-one Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, sometimes Fridays. I still hear the same stories of how women are being misogynistically treated by the medical system, gaslit all the time, told they don't need testing, told the testing doesn't do any good, given one option for hormone replacement, told they only need estrogen if they don't have a uterus. Testosterone doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. The list is endless. And I'm just going to be perfectly honest. It's complete bullshit. It's a flaw in the medical system. We treat menopausal women horribly. And because of that, we now have these predatory websites coming up. These companies that are doing memberships and testing, and some doctor behind a screen somewhere reads your labs and gets you started on hormones. I wouldn't use those because it's pretty impersonal. I don't think the people that work for those companies probably know much about hormones, or else they'd have their own private practices. I know that I'm a little biased, but I do feel like that. I also feel like there's a lot of predatory supplements out there that advertise all these things. And I'm just going to tell you one thing. If a supplement has 47 ingredients in it and it claims to treat all these problems, it's trash. You probably can't absorb half the things that are in there. And I always stick by my guns. I stick by the companies that I like to represent because I believe in their products. Symphony for feminescence, Violet Daily for iodine and breast tenderness, Needed, a whole line of products from omega-3s to pregnancy-related things like vitamins and, GI supplements for probiotics and prebiotics. These are companies that are dedicated to women and women's health, and they're not making false claims. So you have to be your biggest advocate, and you also have to be a savvy consumer. Thanks again for listening. You can get my book, The Hormone Balance Bible, on Amazon. You can call the office. I'll give you a free copy if you come to see me in the office. I know, such a bargain. I'm licensed in about 18 states in the country. You can give me a call. We'll get you on the schedule. We'll order labs. We'll do the whole 9 yards. Have a great day. Have a great week. And we're coming into the holiday seasons. Be ready for my Shines Protocol course, and be ready to listen from my 4 children and what they want to say about me in the month of December. Have a great one.